Well, welcome to Ask Dr. Wilson, where we talk about natural and holistic healthcare. We talk about nutrition, detoxification, ultimately how to take full control over your health. The goal is you don't just listen into the show, but you take action on the information and live better. Thanks for spending some time with me today. Now let's have some fun. All right, well, we're going to have a great show for you today. I've got Dr. Phil Harris here on the show, and we're talking about everyone is sick, and we know why. That's a bold statement, isn't it?
It is a bold statement.
But you know what? We're going to try to back that up. And the reality is that there are so many people who are sick and suffering on medications. 5 out of 6, Dr. Phil, 5 out of 6 Americans are dying of either heart disease or cancer. We know Alzheimer's is on the rise. We can go down statistics. And if you've listened to the show in the past, you know that right now we are serving a sick generation. And unfortunately, there's a lot of people. Now, the average person is on 12 different medications.
Wow.
So think about that. So if that's the case right now, and we understand that we are serving a sick generation, this is the sickest of any generation in human history. Blue Cross Blue Shield did a study of 55 million Americans and came to that conclusion. The sickest of the sickest. We have to take a step back and then start asking some questions about that. And so I want to talk to you about a couple of things. And one of them is maybe a different approach or different paradigm when it comes to health and healthcare. And you and I have talked extensively about maybe it's a wrong approach or maybe the wrong side of the coin that we're using when it comes to healthcare. And so talk to me a little bit about vitalism. You've mentioned that term vitalism.
Right.
So, you hear that word vitalism and vitalistic way of thinking. To you, what does that really mean to be vitalistic or a vitalism paradigm?
Well, the first thing we have to establish is that the body is not programmed for disease or sickness. In other words, it has no idea how to be sick. If we don't establish that foundation, then vitalism will make no sense. So we have to realize the body's programmed to stay well. It doesn't know how to be sick. So every symptom that we have, the body's trying to do something good for us. We've turned symptoms into our enemy, and that's just not the case.
I'll give you an example of that. So I was in the sauna today, and I get out of the sauna, and it was cold in the house, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I get out of the sauna, and literally all the sweat and everything, and now I'm cold. Well, my body starts shivering a little bit. And I actually thought about you today,
Yes.
as I'm basically naked in my bedroom, Dr. Phil. Okay, and I was thinking about you, and I was thinking about I'm shivering. I'm not having to think about my body shivering because my body's naturally has the set point of around 98.6 degrees that is trying to produce heat in order to get back up, and my core temperature rising.
Right.
Just like if you cut your finger right now, your nervous system is going to send blood clotting agents and healing agents into your finger. You don't have to think about that because our bodies are brilliant and they're vital. And is that what you mean by vitalism?
Right. Well, and again, like I said, the body doesn't know how to be sick. It only knows how to get well. It's running on a wellness program. The body's first priority is survival. So that's what the brain's going to run on up until we take our last breath. It's trying to survive. And the fact that we sometimes ignore that and we just push and shove the body around by trying to manipulate symptoms, it causes the body to have to make other decisions. And eventually we don't realize it, but we're getting sicker and sicker even if we're not symptomatic. And finally, we name a disease that is could be lethal at that point. So we've got to get back to looking at what does the body run on? What's it designed to see as real food? What is considered balance or homeostasis in the body? That's a big word for keeping the body vital as well. Most of the time we're off balance because we're sending things into the body and being in environments that are causing the body a tremendous amount of stress and confusion.
Yep. I like this. If there's a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being you're living to your fullness of potential, living vitalistic.
Right.
1 would be close to death. If you're at a 7, so you're living at 70% of your human potential, you're still sick.
Right.
Now, if you're a 6 and you're looking at a 4, you're going to say, well, I'm doing better than most.
Right.
I'm doing better than most.
Right.
But if you're judging your health entirely based off of, hey, am I doing better than my neighbor? Well, we live here in North America.
Right.
So if we're just judging our health based off of how we can do a little bit better than the person standing next to us, well, we are the sickest of any generation in human history, living in the sickest country.
Right.
When you rank all the countries based off of health, we continue to rank dead last.
Right.
We rank last in infant mortality. We rank dead last when it comes to mother's health. So we rank dead last in many of the top categories. And unfortunately, yet the things that we're doing to try to get us healthier, and we call it healthcare,
Right.
but it's really applying a crisis care model to healthcare
it's
and
sick care.
And it really is. It's sick care. And so we're giving people drugs for symptoms that they're getting because of things that maybe they've gotten because of their lifestyle.
Right.
Maybe because of a different paradigm that they, when they do get that fever,
Right.
their child gets a fever, what do they take? They take some medication to lower the fever.
Right. And that's not a good idea, because the fever is the body's response to saving our life from something that's entering it. That's what I meant when I said the body has no idea how to be sick. It's making symptom pictures to help get us well. Now, that doesn't mean we should ignore this, but we just have to have different methods on how to change it. And you made an excellent point just then. You know, in America, if we say on average, a person over 40 is X, Y, or Z, or a person over 70 is X, Y, or Z, but we're basing that on American averages. Mm-hmm. If we move that to different countries where they eat differently, get more sunshine, they not exposed to as many toxins as we are, those averages would completely change. For instance, in America, 75% of the people over 40 have a chronic degenerative disease. Okay, I'm going to say that again. 75% of the people over 40 have a chronic degenerative disease. This is not true in many other parts of the country, and we can track it back to their environment and how they live. You've heard me teach this in my seminars. The Hunza Indians, their women bear healthy children at 100 years of age, and it's well documented. Their men live 120 and 130 years and die working with a clear mind. The only established reason for that is their environment. The scientists have nothing else to tie it to, that they just eat mainly from the vine. They have low consumption of meats. They are in better social areas. They get more sunshine. This is the only measuring stick for that. So in their environment, to say, well, the average woman over 40 is going to deliver a Down syndrome child, that's unheard of in their category. But in America, they don't even want a woman to get pregnant over 40 for these fears. Mm-hmm. What is going on here? That's the question.
Okay, so if I'm average Joe, I say average Joe, maybe that's a little demeaning, but the average Nick out there, okay?
Okay, right.
Average Nick. So, but in America, we see longer lifespans, Dr. Phil. Like right now, there's people living to be older, and how can we say that these Indians, wherever, have a better life or higher quality of life, whatever it might be, when yet here we are, we've eradicated disease. What about smallpox? What about polio? And what about the fact that we live longer now than ever? What do you say to that?
My first response to that is we have to look at all the facts involved in the fact that we're breathing and still, functioning to some degree doesn't necessarily spell life to me. Mm-hmm. Okay. So life to me is being able to remember our kids' names, to be able to still jog if I want to still bowl if I want to still laugh if I want to. It's not just being alive. Okay, when we say we're living longer, I want a little more information about what that looks like, because a lot of the people I know that are, quote, living longer are living with an awful lot of assistance, like you said earlier, 6 to 12 medications, a couple of bypasses, all these different things. And again, for those who didn't know another method, there's no criticism intended. I mean, you do what you had to do to stay breathing, but I know, and there are better ways to go about that. And so these tribes that live longer, they don't have all that manipulation to live longer. That's my first thought.
Mm-hmm. And when you actually study lifespan, an average lifespan, you have to look at what's actually happening. So right now, this is the first time in human history where our lifespan is actually shorter than the previous generation here in America. Right. It's happened 3 years in a row now. It's been completely ignored. So that average person who's saying, yeah, we're living longer. No, we're actually not. This is the first time in human history we're actually not outliving the last generation. Right. And when you actually look at lifespans, what's really interesting is that we're not necessarily living older. We're not dying young. Mm-hmm. So why are we not dying as young? Well, modern sanitation standards such as hand washing between surgeries, as an example. Right. By the way, the doctor who came out with a hand washing between surgeries was considered a quack at the time. In the 1800s, mm-hmm. Samuel Weiss came out and said, hey guys, we should probably wash our hands between surgeries. Yeah. And they said, are you nuts? Are you crazy? He's like, no, there's microorganisms that exist that we can't necessarily see. We'd have to see them under the microscope. They're probably transferring from patient to patient. Right. And he was literally called a quack. Yeah. And so understanding that, so we've washed our hands. We have better sanitation standards. We are refrigerating our food. We are now making sure we have good plumbing for our homes, we're getting rid of the waste, so we're not bathing in feces anymore,
Right.
which when we stopped doing that, polio went away. And so when we started the modern sanitation processes, what do we see?
Right.
Well, we see a healthier population. But now what are we doing? Whenever there is a gallbladder issue or a let's say there's a dysfunction in the tonsils or
Right.
inflammation in the tonsils, what do we do with them? We take these organs out as if they're not needed. We start getting knee
Right.
problems. Our knees are aching. What do? We say, well, we can just go
Let's
in there
replace
and
it.
we can replace it. So that would be more of like a mechanistic philosophy of health
Right.
versus vitalism. Knowing that all of this is interconnected, that we need our adenoids, we need our tonsils, we need our gallbladder,
Right.
we need our appendix, we need these things. It's not like
Right.
God made too much.
No.
It's that no, these are needed even if we don't fully understand the function of them yet,
Right.
and the breadth of because what do they say? We don't need your tonsils. Now we find out tonsils are a needed organ for the immune system.
Well, they're part of the lymphatic system, absolutely. But, it's a good place to bring up dentist. Dentists are taught prevention from the get-go. They think a lot about it. They teach their patients prevention. In fact, through history, if you study many of the breakthroughs in true preventive healthcare, dentists were the ones who came up with them many, many times. It's because their whole mindset was based on prevention. If you go to the dentist, you don't hear them saying, well, just go ahead and drink all the sodas you want, never brush your teeth, never do any maintenance at all. It's not going to really matter. We've got a specific drug that is going to help you with your cavities.
Or brush your teeth when it hurts.
Right.
Well, only brush your teeth when it hurts.
Yeah, you don't hear that. You hear, hey, you need good oral care. And I'm going to tell you, now at 60 years old, I can tell you this. You have several Buicks in your mouth. What I mean by that is, just one tooth can cost as much as a Buick. So if I were you, I'd pay attention to those terms of prevention. And having said that, 66% of the bankruptcies filed in our country are filed because of healthcare issues. So hey, hello, let's wake up and let's do what it is that we need to do to prevent.
Well, I've got a document here that you've written out and you give to some of our patients.
Right.
And
Right.
And I want to ask you a few questions about this, because this is the suppositions of healing. What does that even mean to you? What does suppositions of healing mean?
Well, it's kind of a big term for innate intelligence, to be honest. Innate intelligence is a scientific term for the body's intelligence and the program it's running on. We've talked earlier a little bit about how amazing this body is. Well, if I were to connect your DNA together, it would go from the earth to the sun 100 times. Now, if it just went there once, that would be stunning enough, but 100 times, and we expect a doctor to stand over this body and tell it how to run, you got to be kidding me. We need to be trained on how to assist this body. And so suppositions of healing have to do with the body is not programmed for sickness and disease. The body's first priority is survival. And then the one that really we have to really reflect on is disease is produced by the body for the purpose of survival. Now, that one is hard for people to get.
And that's what I wanted to ask you about, is what does that mean that disease is produced by the body? What do you mean by that?
Well, inflammation, we talk a lot about inflammation these days. In fact, I hear a lot of the medical field that understands inflammatory problems, but what they're not often telling us is that the inflammation is the body's response to a problem. It's not really the problem.
Right.
That's what I want to establish, okay? And in your line of work, chiropractic and nutrition as well, you explain this to your patients all the time. Look, if I eat something that is not agreeable to my digestive system and I wake up the next morning with diarrhea and I run out and get a diarrhea medication to stop what my body's trying to do to possibly save my life, maybe there was a parasite in there, maybe there was a chemical in there that my body was trying to flush out. You see my point? That inflammation is not necessarily the enemy. It doesn't feel good, but it is actually the body's response to something. And so that's what we need to establish when we talk about that. We won't have time to get into this today, but even cancer is the body's way of trying to get well from some problems that we have continued to establish for a long, long period of time. But if we continue to attack, like, for instance, we get a rash, okay? Let's take poison ivy, for instance. Okay. Most of us have had that. We don't like it. Some are more sensitive than others. Those rashes and those little boils that we get from that is the body's response to a toxic oil that's in the leaves of this poison ivy. We don't like it. It doesn't feel good. But the body is trying to resist this toxic oil. Isn't that amazing?
It is amazing. And so here's the other question then. So we look at this and we say the body is doing something brilliantly.
Mm-hmm.
You and I do.
Right.
And yet maybe there's another approach and other paradigm that says, no, it's actually a bad thing. The
Right.
fever is a bad thing. The diarrhea is a bad thing. That
Right.
the cough is a bad thing. The sneezing, the sniffles, all of these things are symptoms,
Right.
and that we need to cover these things up. Yet when we look at animals, if you take any biologist in their right mind, do you remember the Great Lakes problem? The Great Lakes were extremely toxic. Do you remember that?
Yes,
in Michigan,
right.
and Michigan Lake as an example, and Erie was the biggest one, where the
Mhm.
fish were washing up on the Erie shore, and they had tumors, and they were extremely toxic, and their offspring, birds were then eating the fish, and then the offspring of the birds, their eggs were extremely brittle. They were having genetic mutations in the
Yes.
birds, and it created this entire ecosystem of problems. No biologist in their right mind would go to the shores of Lake Erie and look at this and say, you know what's needed, guys? We need to set up tiny fish hospitals to remove the tumors and send them back into the water. You know what we should do is resuscitate these fish and then put them right back into the water. No biologist in their right mind would take these birds and say, we just need to figure out a drug to give the birds to have better and more viable offspring. No biologist in their right mind would do that.
Right.
Yet we do that with human species.
Yes.
And we do that with humans.
Mhm.
And we've been convinced that humans are somehow biologically vastly different in our mechanisms of healing
That's
within
right.
the body of other animals and other mammal species.
Mhm.
And so acknowledging that, hey, we would never do that with animals, yet we do that with humans.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And on the heels of that, I want to give another example for our listeners. If you have heard of the gout, which most people have,
The gout.
The gout.
That's how patients describe it too.
Yeah.
Doc, I've got the gout.
the gout. Most of us know that it's a uric acid problem, but what we don't ask is, why is the body's response to this uric acid for it to end up in the big toe? These uric acid crystals are in the ankle. Okay, why is the path there? Why is it not in the shoulders, for instance? Well, the body's innate intelligence is so smart, it knows that uric acid is highly toxic to the heart. Do you see where I'm going?
I do.
Okay, where do you suppose the body, that innate intelligence, that supposition of healing that we've been talking about, where do you suppose the body's going to decide to put that?
As far away from the heart as possible.
There you go. And that is exactly how the body runs all the time. All the time, all the time. Even when we take a medication and we get a response from it that we think is favorable, meaning a reduction of pain, the body's innate intelligence was involved in that process.
Mm-hmm.
Without innate intelligence, even medications would not have any response.
Well, and this is what's interesting, is because when you talk to the average Joe, average Nick, average Phil,
Right.
and you say the word innate intelligence, there's two camps here.
Right.
One will understand what that means and understand there's an innate ability for the body to heal,
Yep.
and an honoring of that system within the body. And another camp is saying, wait a second, that sounds a little bit like New Agey. That sounds a little bit like maybe a religious thought there, religious theory.
Yep.
What's your response to that right there?
Well, first of all, I make no bones about it. I'm a God-fearing person. I believe in creation. And so I believe that the God that made us knows how to feed us and knows how that we should get well. So there's an awful lot of information in the scriptures about this. As far as the New Age approach, I think that this is just a valley of a disconnect. You know, there's a lot of people out there that are in that thought about energy and New Age and so forth. But you have to remember, anything that's real in this universe belongs to God first, okay? If we come in and begin to make a religion out of that item, okay, then we have taken that away from God the Creator. I believe in energy. We can measure it. Our quantum physicists know that it's real, okay? So this body's energy is constantly working. We can measure it. We can see it. But as far as this New Agey concept, I think it's just a disconnect from if we don't believe in a creator and what we call a intelligent design, we're probably always going to be confused about that a little bit.